or by majority, by means of voting, or by means of show of strength or whatever. That is direct democracy, which is possible only in smaller societies. In smaller countries, it is possible to take all the decisions directly. So that is direct democracy, and we encounter that mostly in very small communities as of now. What we actually are having today in the world is representative democracy, wherein the people who are supposed to govern themselves, who are supposed to be part of the governance, they elect, select a few people on their behalf to govern themselves. That is a representative democracy. It may take a parliamentary democracy form, or it can take a different governance system, which may be presidential form of government. But this is representative democracy. Some of the countries have adopted features of both, which is like a hybrid kind of model of democracy, wherein while it remains representative, most of the important decisions or policy decisions are taken through consent in the form of maybe a plebiscite or maybe a referendum or some kind of this thing. So these are the three basic forms. Now coming to the theory, I would first touch upon the theory of democracy, because without the theoretical or philosophical underpinnings, it is very difficult for an institution to take shape or to take birth or to survive and to sustain. To begin with, prehistoric times, we will find that the philosopher, the first philosopher of the world, Socrates, he started talking about what is best for a human being. What is what is the best way to live? How do we ensure that, and what is the how a human being can be happy? Because they were in a complex society, he started talking about the forms of governance, and he started talking about means of justice. He also developed the concept of utopia, which he called Callipolis. Socrates had not written any books or written any treatises, but his disciple Plato, he started writing it in shape of dialogue. He wrote Republic, and there in the dialogues he essentially captures the thought of Socrates. The Plato's thought was that democracy is not possible because the society is comprising of different individuals, and every individual does not have the same intellectual vigor or physical strength. So he came up with the idea of a philosopher being the king. A philosopher only can make uh, a nation. Those were the city states. We are talking about Greek city states, and those were the city states. So he developed this idea of a philosopher king who can govern the entire city state effectively. His idea was further taken forward by the Aristotle, who wrote Politics. Aristotle, for the first time, came up with the idea of what is called constitution, but constitution not in the sense that we understand it today. Constitution, by constitution, he actually means constituting the governance, constituting different parts of the governance, offices. What should be the power, privilege, and the function of each and every office, depending on the complexity of the society. So, from there, we got an idea, and the Aristotle talks about three forms of governance, that is, rule by many, rule by few, and rule by one. Then we come further down, and we find that almost for 20 centuries there was not much development. Then we come across a book written by Thomas Hobbes, which is called Leviathan. Leviathan essentially means a large creature, a large and powerful either creature or organization. And the contention of Thomas Hobbes was that in a complex society, when the work distribution takes place, it is inevitable for a very powerful government to be there in order to regulate the public life. From there, it originated the idea of governance and a powerful entity, which is the government, could be monarchy, could be republic. Then John Locke further took this idea forward. John Locke was the first person who started talking about equality and liberty and majority rule. John Locke actually almost laid the foundations of the modern democracy, modern democratic setup, because he talked about majority rule, he talked about social contract. This social contract concept was further expounded by Rousseau, and he came up with a sort of a thesis, sort of a theory that social contract is inevitable in a complex society. And what happens is that people voluntarily come forward to give up certain of their rights, certain of their privileges to an entity in order to ensure that a regulated political and social life is possible. This is the concept of social contract that he expounded. Now, this happened in 18th century. In 19th century, we come across John Stuart Mill, who wrote a book on liberty, and he, for the first time, spoke about the need for women also to be part of governance, women also to be given rights of vote. This was 19th century. The above mentioned theories essentially were utilitarian in nature. Utilitarianism would say that maximum good for maximum number of people. And all these theories were founded upon this particular idea. Then slowly, different kind of theories started emerging. One of the most radical and disruptive theory which emerged was the communism. Communism and socialism was a theory which actually looked at the polity, the society, the governance in a very different light. They first of all, it was a materialistic ideology. They said that the material conditions of a society determine everything else, including religion, including politics, including social norms and mores. Accordingly, the communism actually threw the earlier theories to the wind, and they said that the means of production, that is the properties, it may be land, it may be later in the industrialization, the other means of production, it should be owned by all the people. Till now, there was no talk of property ownership or giving property ownership or sharing property ownership. Communism, for the first time, started speaking about that. Some of the later theorists took that idea further and expounded upon it and slightly modified it in form of a socialist thought. Then this was up till now, till 20th century, these developments took place. In 20th and 21st century, we come up with an idea of justice. Till now, it was equality, it was liberty, it was fraternity, people governing themselves to maximum good to maximum number of people. But here, for the first time, John Rawls, he wrote Theory of Justice. This theory of justice, it laid the foundation for the modern welfare democratic republic state, because for the first time he talked about giving rights, privileges to the have-nots, those who are downtrodden, those who are exploited, those who are at the bottom rung of the society should have equal rights. That he started talking about that. From here came the idea of redistributive justice and positive discrimination. And these kind of things were taken by different countries in different forms. Positive discrimination in America today would mean that the African Americans should be given equal rights, and their rights should be protected, and they should be actually given some kind of reservation and those kind of things. The last thinker philosopher, who is actually an economist from India, Nobel laureate Professor Amartya Sen slightly modified the idea of John Rawls as far as the idea of justice is concerned. And his main argument is that the project of social justice should not be evaluated in binary terms, this or that, plus or minus, as either achieved or as not. He claims that justice should be understood as existing to a matter of degree and should correspondingly be evaluated along a continuum. That was the idea that he expounded upon. So, theoretically speaking, as of now, the theory of democracy has come of age and now it has taken firm roots in certain of the countries. Now I'll now talk about the practice of democracy. The democracy, as I said, is a nascent phenomenon in the history of mankind. It started with the uh, hunter-gatherer stage when actually the people started living in community and they used to have kinship and community relations. At that point of time emerged the proto-democracy or what we call tribalism. Here, the democracy was such that because there were small communities of 50 to 100 people, and they came together and took decisions wherein the common interests were involved or common group interests were involved. The first of the organized democracy, as we understand today, it took birth in Athens in the 5th century BC, wherein Athens was a very small city state wherein all the adult citizens, minus the slaves, minus the women, had the right to participate in decision making by show of hands, and all the decisions were taken collectively. And this was what it was actually the germ seed of the democracy in the world. From there, different Greek city states took the idea. Then Rome, which was a republic at that point of time, subsequently which became actually an empire after Julius Caesar took over as a complete emperor. But before that, in Rome also there was a system of republic. There was this like in Athens it used to be called ecclesia. In Rome there used to be senate and there used to be senators who used to sit and take decisions by majority. Coming to the Asian part of the globe, we find that in India, the Indian subcontinent, the germs of democracy were present even much before the Greek city-states were constituted. Indus Valley civilization, while we are not fully aware of the social and political composition of the governance, we are very clear that there is no evidence of an emperor or a king or a monarch in Indus Valley civilization. It was a trading kind of urban establishment, and it is most likely that some kind of democratic governance system was in place there. Then in Magadha kingdom we have the what is called Gana Sanghas. Gan again means people. So Gana Sangha, of course, ruled by Raja, but the Raja was being advised by an assembly which was supposedly very powerful. We also find that right from Vedic ages, when we talk about a compact political entity, they say Janpada or Mahajanpada. Jana again is meaning people. So in India, we have that tradition, and this continued over a period of time, and now also we can see that we have made a very successful democracy out of after independence. After the prehistoric times, advent of Christianity took place, and after some time, the entire world was in chaos, what we call dark ages, the medieval ages. There was not much improvement or development as far as the growth trajectory of democracy is concerned. It was mostly dominated by the knights, by barons, by monarchs, and it was an era of complete chaos, and the poor, the plebeians, the common man, and the agriculturists, they completely suffered at the hands of tyranny of the rulers, and it continued for a long time. In the 7th century onwards, we have the rise of Islam, and there are religious wars, and there are jihads, and there are crusades, and this continued for a long time till the era of enlightenment dawned. The age of enlightenment came, the Renaissance happened, industrial revolution happened, simultaneously as enlightenment is taking place, as the industrial revolution is taking place, colonization and imperialism, they are gaining ground. The European colonial powers almost occupied the entire globe over a period of time. Those were the days when the slavery also, slavery is a very ancient institution, but it gathered momentum after the colonialism succeeded, and it continued for a long time. Then came certain very important, crucial, critical developments. One of the most critical event which has taken place in the history of democracy is what is called Magna Carta. The British king, King John, was forced by 25 barons to give up most of his powers by signing a treaty, a document which was called Magna Carta. This Magna Carta laid the foundation of all the democracies in the European nations today. The concept of habeas corpus originated there. The rule of law that you cannot take away life, liberty, or property without valid and authentic and justifiable means of use of power by the monarch. So there it from the Magna Carta, which happened in 13th century, we have a long way to go till we come to the stage when uh, the America became independent in 1776. They adopted Virginia Declaration of Rights, American Declaration of Independence. It was succeeded just after 1 or 2 decades French Revolution. Now, French Revolution was a watershed event in the history of the democracy in the mankind, because French Revolution had these three slogans: equality, fraternity, and uh, liberty. Liberty, equality, and fraternity became the hallmarks, became the war cry. And it actually, while French Revolution did not survive much, it led to a parliament, and eventually Napoleon took over. And while it did not survive, the idea and the concept of liberty, fraternity, and equality, it started reverberating all over the world. Every country, the thinkers, the philosophers, they took it, expounded upon it, propagated it. Meanwhile, certain events took place in England. Slowly, the powers of the monarch were curtailed, and the power of the people they started gaining. In 19th century, slave trade was banned, and then emerged the era of what we call today democratic republics, where the people used to vote for the governments to come in power. Parliamentary democracy, even in the constitutional monarchies, the House of Commons and House of Elders, the elections started happening. And up till the time of First World War, many of the countries had taken up the democratic form of government, and many of the countries had also gone in for revolutions, and eventually slave trade was abolished. It is very surprising to note that when we talk about democracy, till 19th century, nowhere was a woman ever considered even entitled to vote. Whenever we talk about democracy till the First World War, except New Zealand, we are talking about voting by men only. This is a very surprising element of this whole history of democracy, that then in such a case that universal suffrage concept has actually emerged just a few years back. It's also surprising, in New Zealand was the first country wherein universal suffrage was introduced in 1893. Uh, In Finland, the universal suffrage was introduced in 1906. Uh, Rest of the countries followed. In France, the women got the right to vote in 1944. In the meanwhile, Great Depression happened. After First World War, then the winds of the dictatorship started sweeping the world, and we find that in many of the countries, due to impact and the aftermath of First World War, followed by the Great Depression of 1929, you would have many countries resorting to an option of giving liberty to a dictator to take over because of those situations, and we find emergence of Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, etc. Eventually, the Second World War happened, and simultaneously we have Russian Revolution taking place, 1917. The Russia came under the communist rule. The China later under Mao, it came in the communist rule. Smaller East Asian nations also slowly started going for communism. Today we find that still we have countries which are following the communist system. Communist system is a very different kind of system, wherein while it was originally said and thought and envisaged that the proletariat will eventually take over the control of the resources and the control of the governments. This era wherein some few individuals will take decisions for the proletariat, it is only a stopgap arrangement, it's only a midway was what, but even till today we haven't yet reached that stage wherein proletariat completely take over. And what sort of a governance structure would that be? It's very difficult for me to actually surmise at this point in time. Post World War, we find that India gains independence. In 1950, the Constitution of India came into being. In 1952, the first elections were held. Now, it is very surprising that just in England, after the women got the right to vote, 30 years later, India had given a universal suffrage to everyone. At that point of time, the world was shocked. And it was also said, Winston Churchill himself was of the opinion that India is not able to rule itself. The self-rule is not for the Indians, is what he used to say. We would not be able to make our democracy a successful institution. India is divided in so many nations, so many languages, regions. It is a completely polarized society on so many different frameworks. So it will be not possible for India to make democracy a success. Our good fortune that our founding fathers had the vision and they laid down a system. The constitution was framed in such a way that regardless of whatever happens, the strongest backbone of this country's polity, even till today, remains the constitution, despite the fact that it has undergone so many amendments. The later rest of the world also, the around 1965, all the colonies had gained independence. Whether they were British colonies or Spanish colonies or French colonies, Portuguese colonies, they got independence. They went in for different kind of political structures, but the most preferred means was the democracy. And as on today, many countries which have gone in for democracy. An analysis by the US government funded Freedom House shows that there was not a single liberal democracy with universal suffrage in the world in 1900, 1900, just a decade or more back. But in 2000, that's just in 100 years, 120 of the world's 192 nations, that is 62% of the countries, were democracies. So, democracy has taken roots, and democracy is also being followed by many of the countries. If we really look at the scenario that we that is obtaining in the world today, we find that while democracy has taken root, still it is a nascent institution. And the future of democracy, it is very difficult for us as of now to guess. Why? Because there are different kinds of pulls and pressures which are operating on the democratic forces. There is also the rise of religious fundamentalism. One classic case in point is Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a country which at some point of time had become more or less completely a democratic welfare state. Today it has gone back. Today there are even basic freedoms are not available. There are countries which are struggling with democracy. It is also it's a point of interest to note for the research scholars who would be listening to this that while India, right from beginning, adopted democracy, made it a success, despite so many fractures and fault lines within the social setup, all the neighboring countries have become failed democracies. What could be the reason that every country which is neighboring us, which was also a colony, perhaps at some point of time, either a military junta is ruling it, or a dictatorship, or it is a failed, or continuous turnaround of prime ministers and presidents and complete chaos. That must be a very interesting area, but of course, I'm perhaps out of my time, so I wouldn't take much of your time. I was supposed to finish by 4:45, so I still have some time. I'll talk about what kind of threats the democracy is facing today. And is the democracy that we have is the ideal democracy? Because we have seen, all of us who are in India, we have seen democracy is functioning, it has taken roots, it has come of age. But there are different pulls and pressures. It is not ideal as of now. The money, muscle, power, it's sort of a key factor in deciding the outcome of an election. The polarization within the society, the gap between haves and have-nots, the fact that there are even now illiterate people in the country, there are poorest of the poor. It's very difficult for them to take decision for themselves. The voting percentage is coming down. The political parties are resorting to very narrow sort of goals and they are promising all kinds of things. This is perhaps not the ideal situation. In this, our country as well as different countries, on one hand, while the religious fundamentalism is rising, the chauvinism, the the, the the exclusion of minorities, the ultra right wing political parties are gaining in strength, which is a threatening sort of a scenario because many of the countries which used to be very liberal just a few decades ago have started taking measures where the right wing parties have started gaining in strength. Exclusion of minorities is taking place, exploitation, in fact, genocides are taking place. We can't even be sure that even despite the existence of United Nations, there is no guarantee that there would not be any invasion. Very recently, Ukraine has been invaded by Russia. We do not, while we don't have a stand to take, the fact is military junta is taking over. In Myanmar, it has taken over. North Korea is on the. We don't know what kind of future holds for that country and what kind of war we sort of envisage in the future. Authoritarianism on part of the right wing party is coming in power. The populism and all that, it will lead eventually to some kind of a situation wherein while apparently it would be a democracy, apparently it would cease to be democracy in the spirit of democracy. The way we look at democracy, it will cease to be a democracy. That kind of change is taking place. Now, we might say we are in a democratic country and our interaction is mostly with democratic and uh, welfare states, and we might have a feeling that everything is hunky dory with the world. But it's also very shocking to discover that 50% of the people in this world are not living in democratic regimes as of now. So only 50% of us are in democratic regimes. That is the scenario we have today. What shape democracy will take in future, it's very difficult for us to conjecture at this point of time. I only hope and wish that at least in India, whatever fault lines we have, whatever deficiencies or gaps we have, they should be filled. One of the strongest, as I said, constitution is the strong, and the Election Commission of India is a very strong institution. Hopefully, it will uphold the tenets of the virtues of the ideals of the democracy for the times to come, and hopefully, we would see a better future in times to come. With this, I thank the. I am also at the end of my time, so I thank the organizers of the event. I thank the Pro Vice Chancellor. I also thank the Vice Chancellor of IGNOU, who is, of course, not there, but who has permitted the organization of this 75th anniversary, the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav, and this kind of webinars. I'm sure it will go a long way in spreading not only the knowledge and wisdom, but also bringing people together, um, deliberating on the common things, and awaiting a better future for all of us. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। आज हमने एक अत्यंत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर एक अत्यंत ही अच्छा व्याख्यान सुना। सर ने न सिर्फ लोकतंत्र के इतिहास पर ही बात रखी, बल्कि आज हमारे सामने जो जियो पॉलिटिकल सिचुएशंस उभर के आ रहे हैं, उसमें लोकतांत्रिक मूल्यों के लिए, डेमोक्रेटिक सेटअप्स के लिए क्या चुनौतियां उभर के आ रही हैं, उस पर भी उन्होंने अपनी बातें रखी। और जैसा कि उन्होंने कहा कि सब कुछ हंकी डोरी नहीं है, और आज भी 50% जनता ऐसी है जो डेमोक्रेटिक सेटअप के अधीन नहीं है। ये बड़ी चिंता की बात है। मुझे लगता है कि लोकतांत्रिक मूल्य ही एक ऐसा मूल्य है जो न्याय दिला सकता है, और अगर सबको न्याय मिलना है तो उसको लोकतंत्र के अधीन आना होगा। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर इस अत्यंत ही महत्वपूर्ण व्याख्यान के लिए। अब मैं आज के समाहार के लिए माननीय सम कुलपति और निदेशक स्वाधीनता संग्राम तथा प्रवासी अध्ययन केंद्र आदरणीय प्रोफेसर सत्यकाम सर से अनुरोध करता हूं।
नमस्कार, धन्यवाद। आदरणीय सिसोदिया जी का स्वागत। मैं बहुत ध्यान से उनके हर पंक्ति को और उनके हर वाक्य को सुन रहा था, और जिस तरह से लोकतंत्र के बारे में, डेमोक्रेसी के बारे में उन्होंने बताया, तो मुझे अपने पुराने दिन याद आ गए जब मैं स्नातक का विद्यार्थी हुआ करता था और हमारे शिक्षक हमें पॉलिटिकल साइंस पढ़ाया करते थे। तो बहुत बेहतरीन और बहुत ही रोचक और ज्ञानप्रद वक्तव्य रहा आज का। और हमारे विद्यार्थी जो पॉलिटिकल साइंस के विद्यार्थी हैं, पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, हिस्ट्री के जो विद्यार्थी हैं, उनको जरूर नई दृष्टि मिली होगी, नया परिप्रेक्ष्य मिला होगा। जब हम अपने विद्यार्थियों को पढ़ाते हैं, तो जैसा कि आदरणीय सिसोदिया जी ने हम लोगों को अवगत कराया, हम उनको ग्रीस की ओर ले जाते हैं, यूनान की ओर ले जाते हैं। लेकिन थोड़ा सा मैं इस संदर्भ में ये कहना चाहूँगा कि हमारा जो भारत है, उसके अगर अतीत में जाएं और वैदिक काल में भी जाएं, और ख़ास तौर पर 6ठी शताब्दी ईस्वी पूर्व में जाएं, जब 16 जनपदों की गणतंत्र की स्थापना हुई थी, 6ठी शताब्दी ईस्वी पूर्व में। एक बार मैं वैशाली गया था, और वैशाली में को मैंने देखा, उसके भग्नावशेषों को देखा, और उसके बाद में जब पढ़ा तो वहां भी एक गणतंत्र था। तो निश्चित रूप से उस समय का जो गणतंत्र था और आज का जो लोकतंत्र है उसमें काफी 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 अंतर है। वैदिक जमाने में जो गणों की बात होती थी और किस तरह से गणों का चयन और चुनाव होता था, वो भी सिद्धांततः तो वो जनतंत्र था, लोकतंत्र था, लेकिन उसमें उसकी सक्रियता में, उसके कार्य के परिवेश में और उसके सीमांत में फर्क था। बहुत सही कहा आदरणीय सिसोदिया जी ने कि जो आज का लोकतंत्र है, आज का जो जनतंत्र है, जनता की भागीदारी है, उसमें जिस तरह से प्रतिनिधित्व के द्वारा यह जनतंत्र चलता है, वह जनतंत्र निश्चित रूप से एक नया स्वरूप और आधुनिकता के परिवेश के साथ आया है। बहुत समस्याएं भी हैं इस लोकतंत्र की, इस जनतंत्र की, और कई बार हमें यह महसूस होता है कि क्या ये वास्तव में जनतंत्र है, लोकतंत्र है, क्योंकि जिसे हम चुनकर भेजते हैं वह हमेशा ऐसा नहीं होता कि वो हमारी आकांक्षाएं होती हैं, जो हमारे मन में विचार होते हैं, उन आकांक्षाओं को पूरा करे। दूसरी बात ये भी है कि 49 और 51 का फर्क, लोकतंत्र में 49 और 51 का बहुत बड़ा फर्क होता है, और जो एक बहुवाद है जनतंत्र का, वह बहुवाद कहीं ना कहीं इस लोकतंत्र और जनतंत्र की जो शक्ति है, उस शक्ति पर भी प्रश्न चिन्ह लगाता है। हमारे देश की गरीब जनता सबसे ज्यादा वोट देती है, लेकिन आजादी के बाद से हम ये देख रहे हैं कि उनके लिए कितना काम हो रहा है। आंदोलन होते हैं, नारे होते हैं, मुफ्त राशन बांटे जाते हैं, सब कुछ होता है। गरीबों के लिए बहुत कर्तव्य होता है, बहुत काम करती है हमारी सरकारें, लेकिन क्या वास्तविक विकास हमारे गांव का हुआ है? जो हमारे गांव हैं वही लोकतंत्र के आधार है। मुझे बार बार गांधी जी याद आते हैं, और गांधी जी जिस तरह से लोकतंत्र को और प्रजातंत्र को परिभाषित करते थे, और उनका लोकतंत्र का आरंभ होता था गांव के पंचायत से। अब पंचायती व्यवस्था की पुनर्स्थापना की गई, लेकिन वो व्यवस्था कितनी कारगर है? हमें जरूरत है इस बात को कि आदरणीय सिसोदिया जी जैसे विद्वानों के नेतृत्व में हम इस बात के लिए प्रयास करें कि हमारा लोकतंत्र गांव की ओर लौटे, हमारा जनतंत्र गांव की ओर लौटे, हमारा लोकतंत्र गरीबों की ओर लौटे, और हम उनके बल पर अपने लोकतंत्र को मजबूत कर सके। आज आदरणीय मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में जिस प्रकार इस दिशा में ध्यान दिया जा रहा है वह अभूतपूर्व है। जिस तरह से गरीबों का ख्याल रखा जा रहा है वह अभूतपूर्व है। केवल नारा ही नहीं बल्कि जमीन तक पहुंचने का प्रयास किया जा रहा है, और उस प्रयास में सफलता भी मिल रही है। तो मेरा ये कहना है कि हमें सब मिलकर अपने लोकतंत्र को, अपने अखंड भारत को मजबूत करना है। और हमारा भारत ऐसा है कि एक है लेकिन अनेक भी है, उसमें अनेक खुशबू है, अनेक तरह के रंग हैं। तो इसमें भी लोकतंत्र जिस तरह से खुल रहा है, खिल रहा है, वह हमारी मिट्टी की सुगंध है और मिट्टी की बास है और हमारी जड़ें हैं। क्योंकि जैसा कि मैंने कहा, लोकतंत्र, भारत में लोकतंत्र केवल आजादी के बाद ही स्थापित नहीं हुआ, बल्कि इसकी जड़ें दूर दूर तक हमारे वेदों में, हमारे ऋषियों के वचनों में समाहित है। तो जब हमारी जड़ें इतनी गहरी हैं तो निश्चित रूप से हम एक मजबूत लोकतंत्र के रूप में उभर रहे हैं। और इस लोकतंत्र को मजबूत करना और इसे इसे नए आयामों से युक्त करना हमारा कर्तव्य है। मैं बहुत खुशनसीब हूँ कि आदरणीय सिसोदिया जी हमारे निमंत्रण पर हमारे बीच आए, अपने आपने वक्तव्य दिया और हमें हमारा ज्ञानवर्धन किया। इसके लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद और नमस्कार।
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आदरणीय समकुलपति महोदय। आपने बहुत महत्वपूर्ण बात कही कि जब तक हम अंत्योदय का सपना पूरा नहीं कर पाएंगे, अंत्योदय के लक्ष्य को नहीं प्राप्त कर पाएंगे, तब तक लोकतंत्र पूरी तरह से अपनी सफलता को प्राप्त नहीं कर पाएगा। हमारा देश लगातार इसमें लगा हुआ है, हमारी सरकारें, हमारी संरचना लगी हुई है। आपने उसकी बात भी की। आज हमने बहुत अच्छा वक्तव्य दोनों सुने, आदरणीय सिसोदिया जी और आदरणीय प्रोफेसर सत्यकाम सर के। धन्यवाद ज्ञापन का दायित्व मुझे है। सबसे पहले मैं आदरणीय श्री आरपी सिसोदिया जी को धन्यवाद देता हूं। अपने अत्यंत ही कीमती समय से हमें कुछ मिनट निकाल के उन्होंने दिए, 1 घंटे से हमारे साथ हैं और अत्यंत ही महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आज हमारे सामने अपनी बात रखी। लोकतंत्र एक ऐसा विषय है जिस पर हमेशा ही चर्चाएं होती रहती हैं और चर्चाएं होनी भी चाहिए। लोकतंत्र की यही खुशबू है। आप हमारे बीच आए, हमारे आग्रह को, हमारे अनुरोध को स्वीकार किया, इसके लिए मैं पूरे विश्वविद्यालय परिवार की तरफ से आपका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं और धन्यवाद देता हूं। मैं अपने माननीय कुलपति महोदय आदरणीय प्रोफेसर नागेश्वर राव जी को भी धन्यवाद देता हूं। उन्हीं की प्रेरणा से हमारा विश्वविद्यालय दिन रात प्रगति कर रहा है, दिन दूनी रात चौगुनी प्रगति कर रहा है। और यह जब कार्यक्रमों की जो श्रृंखला हमारे सेंटर की ओर से चल रही है, उसमें भी उनकी प्रेरणा और उनके द्वारा दिया हुआ साहस हमेशा ही हम लोगों की मदद करता है। मैं उनको नमस्कार करते हुए उनका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। माननीय समकुलपति महोदय आदरणीय प्रोफेसर सत्यकाम सर, जो कि केंद्र के निदेशक भी हैं, इस पूरी जो सीरीज चल रही है इसके प्रेरणा स्रोत भी हैं और इसके केंद्र में भी हैं। उन्हीं के श्रमसाध्य प्रयत्नों से और लगातार हम लोगों को दिए जा रहे उत्साह से, लगातार दिए जा रहे गाइडेंस से यह काम होता रहता है। हम आगे भी करेंगे और 75 व्याख्यानों की श्रृंखला को भी पूर्ण करेंगे और उनके कुशल निर्देशन में हम इसको पुस्तक का भी रूप देंगे, ई बुक का भी रूप देंगे। तो मैं आपको सर बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद देता हूं, आपको नमस्कार करता हूं और आभार व्यक्त करता हूं कि आप लगातार हम लोगों के लिए एक संबल के रूप में खड़े रहते हैं। मैं अपने अन्य माननीय समकुलपतियों को भी धन्यवाद देता हूं। आदरणीय प्रोफेसर राजेंद्र प्रसाद दास सर मुझे दिख रहे हैं, आपको नमस्कार करता हूं और सभी समकुलपतियों को धन्यवाद देता हूं, उनका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। विद्यालय के, महाविद्यालय के, विश्वविद्यालय के सभी पदाधिकारियों को भी धन्यवाद देते हुए उनका आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। हमारी तकनीकी टीम जो इसके प्रसारण में लगी हुई है उसको भी धन्यवाद देता हूं और आप सबको, श्रोताओं को धन्यवाद देता हूं। अपने सभी क्षेत्रीय केंद्र के निदेशकों को धन्यवाद देता हूं जो लगातार हमारे साथ जुड़े रहते हैं और उनके साथ उनका जुड़ा होना, उनकी उपस्थिति हमें और उत्साहित करती रहती है। तो इस आशा के साथ कि आप सब हमसे ऐसे ही जुड़े रहेंगे और हमारा उत्साहवर्धन करते रहेंगे, अब हम कार्यक्रम के अंत की तरफ बढ़ रहे हैं और कार्यक्रम का समापन हम सदैव राष्ट्रगान से करते हैं। तो मैं संजय जी से अनुरोध करता हूं कि राष्ट्रगान का संचालन करें और आप सबसे अनुरोध है कि कृपया अपने स्थान पर खड़े हों।
अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता, पंजाब सिंधु गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल गंगा, विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उत्कल जलधि तरंगा, तब शुभ नामे गावे, तब शुभ आशीष मांगे, गाहे तब जय गाथा, जन गण मंगल दायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता, जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे।
अब आज का यह कार्यक्रम यहीं समाप्त होता है। आप सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। और मैं आदरणीय सत्यकाम सर से अनुरोध करूंगा कि अगर आगे का कोई निर्देश हो तो उससे बताएं।
राह हम तय कर रहे हैं, राह तय करेंगे। मैं आदरणीय डॉक्टर प्रोफेसर राजेंद्र प्रसाद दास जी को नमस्कार करता हूं कि आप हमारे इस कार्यक्रम में उपस्थित हैं, और सभी लोगों को और आप लोगों को मैं धन्यवाद इसलिए देना चाहता हूं, सब लोगों को, कि इतने लंबी श्रृंखला में आप लोग हमेशा सक्रिय रहे। ये 56वीं सीढ़ी हम लोग चढ़ चुके हैं। अगले सप्ताह 57वीं सीढ़ी पर हम चढ़ेंगे, और ऐसे करते करते फिर 75 श्रृंखला हम पूरी कर लेंगे। निश्चित रूप से इसमें हमारे कुलपति आदरणीय प्रोफेसर नागेश्वर राव जी का आशीर्वाद है। उनसे प्रेरणा, उनसे हम सब बल प्राप्त करते हैं। उनकी ऊर्जा शक्ति से हम सब ऊर्जा ग्रहण करते हैं, और निश्चित रूप से अपना कार्य करने की कोशिश करते हैं। तो फिर अगले सप्ताह इसी समय, इसी वक्त एक नए विषय और एक नए विद्वान के साथ हम लोग मिलेंगे, और हम लोग अपना 57th लेक्चर सीरीज पूरी करेंगे। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, शुक्रिया सब लोगों के शामिल होने के लिए।
धन्यवाद सर, नमस्कार।
हेलो हेलो, प्रणाम सर।